Sunday, September 3, 2023. I'm Anthony Davis. Welcome to The Weekend Show, where we take a deep dive into the news of the week. You can support my work and independent journalism at patreon.com/5minutenews. Our guest today is the author of 8 books, including American Rule, How a Nation Conquered the World but Failed Its People, and Midnight Kingdom, A History of Power, Paranoia, and the Coming Crisis. Jared Yates Sexton, welcome back to The Weekend Show.
Anthony, always good to see you, my friend.
We're into September now, but August was a kind of momentous month in American political history, and, not least because the disgraced former president faces now a total of 91 charges across 4 criminal cases. 44 federal charges, 47 state charges, all of them felonies. The Fulton County District Attorney has charged Trump and 18 others in connection with efforts to reverse his 2020 election loss in the state. I never thought this would happen, because it has been a while since January 6th. The coup, the insurrection, the riot, whatever you want to call it. And yet, the fact that it has taken 2.5+ years is actually now being used as being weaponized by the Trump team. And they're like, well, if I'd have done something so bad, why is it taking you guys so long to do anything about it? How do you feel about this, these indictments? And do you think that it's the right thing at the right time?
Well, first of all, I'm no legal expert, but 91 indictments is, it strikes me as bad. It strikes me as not a good situation when you're looking down the barrel of almost.
And he says he's not guilty of all of them. I mean, this is the thing, it's not like, oh yeah, I might have done that one and not those 90. Like, he's denying everything.
Absolutely. To talk about this thing, I'm going to do something that's antithetical to a lot of political discourse. I want to talk about this in an actual nuanced, adult, mature way. First of all, is Donald Trump guilty of all these things that we all watched him do in real time? Absolutely he is. Should he be held accountable for what he has done? Absolutely. Like you, I did not think he was going to get charged with these things. I did not think that the legal system would hold him accountable. But let's also be mature and admit that our judicial system, our institutions, our political system did not particularly want to charge a former president with these crimes. He forced their hands. And we can both admit that that is true, that it is political in nature, but that also doesn't mean that it's not true that he did these things and that he deserves to be held accountable for it. I personally, I think there are a lot of people, Democrats, Republicans, independents, you name it, who really wish that Donald Trump simply would have retired to Mar-a-Lago. He would have crashed people's weddings, done photo ops, come out to hail to the chief every now and again, and do that for the rest of his days. By continuing to insist that he would run for the presidency and possibly even become, the 47th president, I think that forced a lot of hands. And so, I think we have to look at this, again, maturely. We have to be honest about it. We have to not take someone like a Jack Smith or the Attorney General, Merrick Garland, and say that these are messiahs and heroes. We have to look at it with a little bit of a side askew. But we also need to understand that Donald Trump is getting his just desserts for what he has done and the role he has played. But, and I want to point this out, Anthony, because it wouldn't be me if I didn't point this out, while Donald Trump is being held accountable for these things, while the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers and a lot of the people in his orbit are being held responsible for it, the people who funded this, the people who strategized it, the people who basically ran the entire operation, the billionaire donors, their institutes, their think tanks, their organizations, have gone completely without any scrutiny whatsoever. Donald Trump has eaten up a lot of scenery in this, taken up a lot of oxygen, and I don't think that is an accident in any way, shape, or form.
The lobbyists and the think tanks, these organizations, they play a very large role in American politics, and they are, as you say, largely hidden. The Federalist Society, for example, these kind of organizations that are under the radar. People know they're around and they don't know how much influence they may have. And yet there is always some kind of plot going on for something. Installing, that word installing a president or installing a leader. And I find it fascinating that in this country, you don't have to vote for a leader to be the leader of the party. Like, anybody can just be like, okay, I'm going to run for the Republicans, and kind of nationally they become adopted by osmosis. in the UK, a party leader is voted upon, and then that leader becomes the prime minister if they win a general election. So it's very interesting to me how it just people just roll with it. But I did want to say that there is now evidence that Merrick Garland did delay the investigation of Donald Trump. Talk to me about the culture in the US of not wanting to indict a former president.
Well, I want to go ahead real fast. I want to add something to something that you just said. With these institutes, these think tanks, I don't think this is something that gets brought up in a lot of political conversations. The Republican Party is a public relations front for these people. Like people who want to think that like Mitch McConnell, or back when, he was particularly effective and lucid, that he was sitting in an office drafting legislation or plans. That's not true. These things are created by groups that are funded by billionaire donors who go ahead and institute this all around the country. The Republican Party is largely it's a clown car. It's a group of people who continually push culture war ideas, controversial ideas that go ahead and sort of prick the fears, the insecurities, and the prejudices of their base. So that's
Kevin
what's
McCarthy's a good example, right? Because he's not a smart guy, doesn't have the vocabulary or the ability or the intellect to be able to do some of the things that are happening.
No, he absolutely doesn't. Kevin McCarthy is literally every single day as Speaker of the House attempting to save his political life. Yeah. And so much of it is trying to keep this wild card Freedom Caucus to, keep from basically submarining his entire office. But to go along with that, one of the things that you just brought up in terms of Merrick Garland not necessarily wanting to prosecute Donald Trump or not wanting to go after former presidents, it's necessary to understand that prior to our current moment, we're in this moment of upheaval. I call it a moment of crisis, and there are plenty of reasons why it's happening. There is a big power struggle happening right now. The Republican Party is being taken over by authoritarians who want to go ahead and push people like McCarthy or McConnell out of the way in order to use the power of the government for a certain thing and to basically break up the neoliberal order that we've been living under. That neoliberal order, that consensus, it was very much a beltway culture, Anthony, in which Democrats and Republicans hung out all the time. They knew the same people. They were funded by the exact same people. They disagreed on this and that and what the tax code should do or what this should do, at the margins. That's where they fought most of their battles. And meanwhile, you could talk tough. You could talk about George W. Bush, prosecuting an illegal war, global war on terror that killed over 1 million people. You could talk about Ronald Reagan did this or Bill Clinton did that, but you were largely playing a game of softball. You were still hanging out with one another. You shared a lot of the same donors. You had the same goals. But what is happening right now is a hostile takeover. And one of the things that's happening is that Donald Trump, who I don't think he could explain this to you if he had to. Yeah. I think he intuits it. I think
he's a mark, isn't he? He's like an empty vessel, a blank canvas, and he's perfect for these people to manipulate. And
because
he doesn't realize.
No, he has no idea what he's doing at any given time, but his distaste for authorities, his distaste for limitations and checks on his power are inherently fascistic. And what they've done is they've broken they've revealed that a lot of these institutions are broken. And a lot of the very, very smart people who I'm talking about, these ideological right-wing authoritarians, they saw what Donald Trump did and they've taken advantage of it. They've just absolutely run roughshod over the past few years because of what Donald Trump has revealed. When it comes to Trump and his blatant criminality, his just absolute overt self-dealing and cravenness, he has pushed the hand of people who really do not want to be in the business of prosecuting former presidents. And why? Because you could probably prosecute almost every former president for some crime or shape or power. The office is more or less being there in order to do things that, upon closer scrutiny, are a little bit problematic. Nobody wants to go down that road, but it just so happens that Donald Trump's peculiar brand of cravenness meant that something had to be done. And so it's a reluctant act, top to bottom.
But this is what concerns me because, so much that happens in U.S. politics is performative.
Yes.
And I would, argue that, raising the debt ceiling and government shutdowns is performative. Absolutely. There's no reason for it, right? It's like, you've got to carry on with the government. Just carry on funding it. It's just debt is debt is debt. And yet there's this whole theatrical production that goes with it. And the media, they put things on the screen, 10 hours to shut down. And tragically, in those situations, the people that pay the price are government workers, federal workers, who go without a paycheck for a few weeks. I know it gets paid back, but even so, it's like life is not good for them. Meanwhile, the wealthy continue to enjoy their lives. So it is inherently unfair. But the performative aspect of this, of sending him to the Fulton County jail to get booked, and the mugshot and all of the, people are comparing the image to Che Guevara and all this stuff. It's like, seriously? This guy committed a coup against his own country. If there's 91 charges, there's no shortage of criminality. My fear is, though, that if he's never going to be incarcerated, in the same way that Merrick Garland didn't want to investigate him in the first place, there's no precedent for incarcerating a president in the United States. Yes, we can look at Nicolas Sarkozy in France and whatever, but Europe is not America. I don't see the point in all of this performance if he's not going to be punished like a regular civilian.
Well, Anthony, what you're discounting is the emotional part of this entire performance. Let's be very clear about things like the mugshot. And listen, I know this isn't going to endear me to some of your viewers. I know this isn't going to make me popular to say. I was actually very turned off by the mugshot discourse. The large part of this was the humiliation of it, making him go into this place, get a mugshot taken. Of course, people, and this has always bothered me, we have to talk about how much he weighs. It's basically the equivalent of like putting somebody in a public stock. Right. And just basically having them become a sin eater that we can look at and say, this person is suffering consequences. Obviously, everything must be right in the world. It's very performative. And it is in a large way what we have seen over the past few years. As governmental power has been undermined, which is one of the problems. Going back into the late 1970s and particularly in the 80s and then the 90s, governmental power has been completely curtailed. In the past, the government and government officials used to be able to do things for people, make lives better, to invest in social projects and social safety nets. Since then, it has become professional wrestling. There's nothing for these people necessarily to do besides to lower tax rates for the wealthy, to occasionally inject money into the economy during times like COVID, in which otherwise the entire economic system might melt down. But otherwise, they're arguing about whether or not we should have gas stoves, right? Ted Cruz, I think this was a really telling clip recently where he said, the government said that I can only have 2 beers a week. Well, that's not what the government said. This is an Ivy League educated lawyer who isn't a good old boy from Texas, but he pretends like he is because it helps his fundraising. It is a character and it's a performative act. So what has happened is that inertia for the government to do things for people has been replaced by the simulation of doing things for people. They can go ahead and personalize the anger of things, which is why Donald Trump was a perfect leader at this moment for these people. He didn't really do anything for them. He actually made their lives worse. He actually continued on, the gross inequality and historic inequality. He actually went ahead and he didn't drain the swamp. He added to the swamp. He didn't actually build the wall. He told them he built the wall. But what he gave them was emotional catharsis. And unfortunately, what's happening in our politics is it's moved from being a process by which the future is supposed to be made better to a point in which the present is supposed to have some sort of an emotional catharsis that substitutes in for anything actually being done.
The former president posted a video on Thursday of him holding up a T-shirt with his mugshot on it and was like, come and get your T-shirts. Fundraising off of that image, which he wanted. He wanted a mugshot. He wanted it to go viral. He wanted all of the trappings of the iconography. And that is, for me, the saddest part of this, is that we're now in a situation where a former president of the United States is proud of his criminality, is proud of his mugshot, and, is about to go into an election year where he'll be in court more than he'll be on the debate stage. I mean, it can't be good for America. just what it's doing to the country in the meantime, because aside of whether he's convicted or not, this process, I mean, the 4 years that he was president were bad enough, but we've had him on screen every day since. And now, like the My Pillow guy, he's selling merchandise.
Yeah, it actually harkens back to the good old days of Dillinger and Capone. America, particularly America's strain of capitalism that has just grown over us like so much kudzu at this point. It emphasizes destructive things. And I think we're going to talk more about this in this conversation. But one of the things that's happened here is that Donald Trump has literally taken an incredibly shameful thing. He has been indicted for, again, over 90 things that he has done wrong in betraying the country and trying to lead the country astray. This, in the past, would have been a moment for him to have said goodbye to the limelight, gone and taken his medicine, and America would have learned from it, or a country would have learned from it. Instead, now he's embodying the villain role. And one of the things, whether or not it's in modern politics or professional wrestling or whatever it is, people like to root for the villain sometimes, particularly in moments in which they feel powerless or they feel like the system isn't fair. And for the record, the system is not fair. I did an interview a couple of weeks ago, Anthony, where someone said to me, can you believe that people don't trust our institutions anymore? Can you believe that people don't trust the judicial system? Can you believe what Trump did? And I said, he didn't do that. There are reasons we shouldn't trust our systems and our judicial system. They're legitimately corrupt. So as a result, Donald Trump has figured out a way to make money from that, gain power from that, and take advantage of what is actual frustration. And in that case, and this is kind of a losing hand that we find ourselves in currently, the Democratic Party, because it's in power and because the Republican Party has become a fascistic authoritarian movement that is trying to destroy everything, the Democratic Party has been turned into an institutional defender and guardian, basically telling everybody who knows that things are not right and that things are not working correctly, hey, I promise you, if we just stay patient, things will figure themselves out.
They've become the conservatives, Jared. I mean, that's the irony. They are the Republicans. They care for the Republic. They want to keep the Republic together. And yet the traditional Republicans have now become the Rebel Alliance, they've got their own agenda, and it does not, because, for example, Marjorie Taylor Greene, we're not a democracy. We're a constitutional republic. I mean, this language is pushing further and further away from that tradition of conservatism and wanting to protect the republic.
Yeah, and what has actually happened is that conservatism and liberalism in the last 40 to 50 years, starting back in the 1970s, going into the 80s, they sort of blended into this neoliberal sludge. Again, there were conversations about, should we allow gay marriage? What role should women have in a society? What should civil rights look like? Like, those were real, actual discussions. But when it came to what the government should do and how the economy should function, largely it was a consensus. And so what has happened in the past few years as this consensus has led to really destructive things, you now have a new breed of Republicans. I call them neo-fascist. I write about the fact in the Midnight Kingdom that they are absolutely obsessed with getting rid of liberalism, representative government, and democracy. They will tell you, if you listen to them, if you read their books, you even listen to their campaign speeches, what they tell you is they want to use the power of the government. They've learned from Marx. They've learned from Lenin. They want to use the power of the government in order to tear down representative government and create sort of a neo-feudal state in which they are in control of everything. And for people listening at home who say, that doesn't sound like small government, no, it's not small government. It's very, very large government, because these people understand something that a lot of other people haven't for a long time, Anthony, which is the principles of the Republican Party were never principles to begin with. If you believe in small government, you don't care what people do in their bedrooms. You don't care who they love or what they do. If you're really for those values, that's not something you concern yourself with. They're not fiscally conservative. They run up massive deficits every time they're in power. These are simply weapons. And this new breed of Republican that is taking over the Republican Party, they are not what you would consider conservative. They're radicals. They're very, very dangerous people. And the threat that they represent has put everybody else on the defensive. And I'll tell you, in times where things aren't working, being on the defensive, it doesn't work that well.
And yet, of the 6 or 7 videos that Donald Trump posted in the last few days. Each one includes him. He was foaming at the mouth, incidentally, which I found quite revolting. But he kept saying they're Marxists, they're fascists, they're communists. And this now is becoming a kind of, we heard it a little bit before. But, it bears no resemblance to reality. It's mainly projection. But the irony is now that this critique of the other side as Marxists should be turned on its head because, as you say, their inspiration is coming from some of these political movements of history.
Yeah, it's actually really interesting what's happened. I used to be a professor in the humanities, and one of the things that we often talked about was how language and meaning got twisted up and turned around. I'll never forget the day I got out of a meeting and I saw that Marjorie Taylor Greene had referred to communist corporations, which is an incredible construction. It really, truly is. And what has actually happened, and I hope I don't get too far in the weeds here, what has actually happened is that American corporations have realized that liberal and or tolerant ideas are what make their products more acceptable and appealing to people because the majority of people are accepting and tolerant and care about people not feeling oppressed.
And this references diversity and inclusion, for example. Any of these companies that are trying to be more diverse and more inclusive, it's good for business. And
it keeps them from being sued. Let's be very clear about that. Quote unquote woke corporations are actually worried more about being boycotted or being sued than they are, pushing forward liberal or woke ideologies. Corporations are not ideological. That is their founding. That is their entire basis.
It's the bottom line every time.
Right. But the basis of what people like Marjorie Taylor Greene or other of these new breed of Republicans want to do, Anthony, they literally want to use the power of the government to compel corporations and media institutions to espouse their ideology. They understand that the majority of the culture doesn't agree with what they believe in. They understand that their ideas are incredibly unpopular. But they are based on historical ideas that by going ahead and creating a dictatorship of ideas, a minoritarian dictatorship, you can go ahead and change discourse. You can go ahead and change culture by compelling it to accept your ideas, which is where they're at now. And they're trying everything from J.D. Vance, the despicable senator from Ohio, on the campaign trail talked constantly about letting people with children have more than one vote. Right. Or, now they talk about raising the voting age. Like they're trying everything in their power to dismantle democracy so that they can use these democratic institutions to their own ends. And the entire purpose of it is to create a cultural hegemony that they can use as a weapon.
Voting only on one day, doing away with proxy voting or mail-in voting. It's so obvious, though. This is the thing that's like they're not trying to hide the authoritarianism. And maybe in years gone by they did try and hide it, but now it's just out there for all to see. And I am very surprised that the media has not picked up on it, has not done more focused journalism about the rise of fascism, the rise of authoritarianism in the West. I want to talk about that in some detail in just a moment. We have to take a quick pause for our sponsor, and then we'll come back with more from Jared Yates Sexton. I'm excited to tell you about Moink. That's Moo plus Oink. Moink is a meat subscription box company on a mission to fight for the family farm. They're located in rural America, run by an 8th-generation female farmer. Their animals are raised humanely, their employees are paid a living wage, and the quality of their product is better than anything you'll find in the store. Moink delivers grass-fed and grass-finished beef and lamb, pastured pork and chicken, and sustainable wild-caught Alaskan salmon straight to your door. Moink farmers farm like our grandparents did, and as a result, Moink meat tastes like it should, because the family farm does it better, and the Moink difference is a difference you can taste. Now, unlike the supermarket, Moink gives you total control over the quality and source of your food. You choose the meat delivered in every box, like ribeyes to chicken breasts to pork chops and salmon fillets and much more. Plus, you can cancel your box delivery anytime. I personally have struggled in the US to find meat that doesn't have antibiotics in it or hormones added. And finally, I found a place where I can just go and trust that all of those things are taken care of for me. Now, I know that this is the right thing to do. I'm sure you will too. Just keep American farming going by signing up at moinkbox.com/weekend right now. And listeners of the show get free ground beef for a year. That's 1 year of the best ground beef you'll ever taste, but for a limited time. So go to Moink, spelt MOINK, box.com/weekend. That's moinkbox.com/weekend. I've always found it difficult to find clothes that I like to wear, and when I find one thing that works, I just buy loads of them and just wear the same thing all the time. Well, men's closets were due for a radical reinvention, and Rhone stepped up to the challenge. Rhone's commuter collection is the most comfortable, breathable, and flexible set of products known to man. And here's why. Rhone helps you get ready for any occasion. The commuter collection offers the world's most comfortable pants, dress shirts, zips, and polos. You'll never have to worry about what to wear when you've got the Rhone commuter collection. The comfortable four-way stretch fabric provides breathability and flexibility that leaves you free to enjoy what life throws your way, from your commute to work or your 18 holes of golf. It's time to feel confident without the hassle. With Rhone's wrinkle release technology, wrinkles disappear as you stretch and wear the products. It's that easy. And with Gold Fusion anti-odor technology, you'll be smelling fresh and clean all day long. And on top of that, Rhone is 100% machine washable, so you can ditch the dry cleaner altogether. I personally love a technical fabric, something that is advanced and uses technology to make a more comfortable and more modern outfit. Now, the commuter collection can get you through any workday and straight into whatever comes next. So head to rhone.com/Anthony and use promo code Anthony to save 20% off your entire order. That's 20% off your entire order when you head to rhone.com/Anthony and use code Anthony, ANTHONY. It's time to find your corner office comfort. It's the Weekend Show. I'm Anthony Davis. There was an article that was published in the Washington Post last week. The headline, "Journalism Fails Miserably at Explaining What is Really Happening to America." It was written by Will Bunch. I just want to read, Jared, a few sentences from this. You and I have been discussing this kind of offline, this article, and I know that you also felt compelled to talk about it because, from my perspective as a journalist, it's very frustrating watching the network channels, the cable news, and seeing what people are being served when there is so much more to discuss. So the article said if you watch the hours of TV news coverage during an especially momentous week in August, there was little sense of that reality, and for long stretches of pundit blather, none at all, as talking heads gave earnest high school debating marks to candidates who were all but ignored by the GOP voter base. Talking about the GOP debate, of course. The disconnect deepened the next night as Trump turned what would surely be his comeuppance, his surrender at Atlanta's bug-infested county jail for fingerprinting and a mugshot, into an outlaw display of authoritarian force. They say it was a remarkable night of imagery over substance, yet there was little discussion of why this accused felon was getting a phalanx of dozens of motorcycle cops comprising police who are drawn to Trump's authoritarian bluster like moths to the light. Trump, glowering mugshot, instantly becoming the most talked about picture in American history, yet not one pundit was able to explain why tens of millions of everyday voters are so eager to return him to the White House, a man who attempted a coup, or why his poll numbers rise with each indictment. Over to you, my friend.
Yeah, I thought Will's article was really well written and really well reasoned. Anthony, there's been a problem over the past few years. I got into this political game back in 2016. I was going to Trump rallies, and I was telling everyone what I was hearing, from his supporters and what I was seeing in this movement. And I was screaming. I was like, this is a really dangerous thing. It's letting loose these authoritarian energies. It's radicalizing people. This is going somewhere very, very bad. And I kind of had a moment where I was like, why aren't more people picking up on this? Like, why is it that this very obvious thing isn't getting more play? And occasionally there would be moments where, and I'm sure you remember these, I'm sure your viewers do as well, there'd be articles like in the New York Times or the Post that would be like, is Donald Trump a threat to democracy?
Yeah.
Question mark?
Yeah. Should we be calling it fascism?
Should we be calling it fascism?
Yeah.
And also, we brought up January 6th earlier. I don't know if people remember this because it's a very upsetting thing. We all watched an attempted coup play out live on television in front of the entire world. And for a few hours, it seemed like everybody understood what was going on. And within 24 hours, major pundits and journalists were like, I don't think what we saw actually happened. I don't think it was as bad as we thought it was.
Yeah, it was tourists.
And I think a lot of what has happened, it can be broken down into a couple of key points. One is that our media, as much as they despise Donald Trump, and they do, they are addicted to him to no end. Our media, our economy is wired for self-destruction. We need to keep people terrified. We need to keep them anxious, but we also need to keep them tuning in. And Donald Trump is the biggest gift that the media has ever had. Occasionally Donald Trump tells the truth by accident. And one of the things that he told the truth about was when he said the New York Times, the Washington Post, and the media absolutely loved him because of what he did for their ratings and their subscriptions. He's 100% right. And it has been the case. And they love anything that keeps people terrified and continuing to click or to look on. The other problem in all of this is that our media class is largely comprised of wealthy, privileged people. And I don't know if, again, your viewers know this. It costs a lot of money to live in New York City. And to work as a journalist, and they don't get paid very much, whether it's in print or online or cable news media, you don't get paid that much. So as a result, you need to go ahead and have something that will make sure that you can pay for an apartment in New York City or keep you afloat, which means that most of the people who are there come from money. They come from privilege. As a result, they're not that interested in critiquing the institutions that are decaying. And so whenever they look around at the world, and this is something that I think Americans really struggle with, we have a hard time recognizing what's actually going on, because to look at the problems with America means looking at the narratives we tell ourselves about ourselves. Like, if you are a really, really successful pundit in the New York Times or MSNBC or you name it, you're at the top of a ladder. Are you going to go around telling everyone that the ladder, is rotten? That the ladder was unfair? As a result, you don't want to look at white supremacy. You don't want to look at patriarchal power.
Well,
you don't
it's
want to look at the nature of
self-sabotaging, isn't it? This is the problem.
It's self-sabotaging. Yeah. So we have an entire media class. And by the way, tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of Americans are screaming at these people. Why do you not recognize what's happening? And why do you keep making it worse? And these people are largely in their own ecosystems and bubbles. They can't reckon with what's going on, and they can't reckon with their own part in it.
It's good for business at the end of the day.
It's great for business.
Because most people don't watch the news. And, look, I have a confession to make, and that is that I am addicted to Donald Trump. I am addicted to him in as much as, and this is like a quote from Howard Stern years ago when he was talking about the rise of his radio show. People listened because they just wanted to know what he was going to say next. And it's the same with Donald Trump. It's like, can he get crazier? Can he become more abusive and aggressive and inappropriate? And he's ramping it up at the moment. I mean, I've been putting some videos out, kind of really trying to kind of analyze his language. And I do get a sense that it's becoming more abusive towards Jack Smith and towards Letitia James and towards Fani Willis and anybody who is against him. And the problem with this now, though, is that even those moments are good box office material. My addiction to him is more about trying to save American democracy. I personally, because I come from Europe, where we get daily reminders of the threat of authoritarianism, bomb sites along the streets of London, areas. I lived next door to one that was never rebuilt, or new buildings in the middle of a row of old buildings. Oh yeah, well that's where a bomb landed in 1942, you see. So it's like constant reminders, but we don't have that here in the US. And so as you say, this kind of media elite, it's not something they need to worry about. In the same way that my reference to the government shutdown earlier, the reason that politicians play with these moments is because it doesn't change their lives. Those 2 weeks without a paycheck doesn't affect them. But for regular people, it does.
Well, and let's go ahead and let's talk about red state and blue state America. Like, one of the things that has happened, and the Republican Party has absolutely taken advantage of this, it's that red state and blue state America are worlds apart from one another. And whenever you're sitting there, and I noticed this all the time on social media, it broke my heart, Anthony. People would say, I wish the South would just secede and get it over with, and we can live in different countries. I lived in Georgia for a decade. I grew up in Indiana. I have to tell you, there are people in those red states who are absolutely in danger. They've been oppressed. There's, they live there and people say, well, they can move. Well, it takes money to move. And blue states, because their state of living is often better, they're more expensive and maybe their jobs don't work there. We need to start recognizing that there are a lot of people, whenever we start talking about politics like it's a game or it's a strategy, right? And you'll see these centrists who are like, well, I believe that like people of color have been discriminated against, but like it's bad for politics to talk about it too much. I wish they would calm down with it. And, I know women feel bad about what happened with Roe v. Wade, but maybe this isn't the right issue in this election. Or gay and trans people, they really turn off people in the suburbs. So maybe we can deal with that later or whatever. You're literally talking about people's lives.
Yeah.
And that authoritarianism that you talked about in Europe, it gave us a really haunting lesson, which is you do not defeat it by sacrificing people. You do not defeat it by playing footsie with it and playing games with it. You take it on directly. England, for instance, people might not know this. England had a problem with fascism itself. It was really picking up steam before World War II. Same thing as the United States, for the record. The reason that England was able to avoid some of the same traps that fascist countries didn't is because they confronted it in the streets and they said, you're not welcome.
Yeah. You're referring to people like Enoch Powell, for example.
Exactly.
Who took to the streets to kind of deliver a message of fascism, and the people rejected it.
The people literally got in the streets with bottles and brooms, and they said no. The United States had a problem with fascism and largely was able to avoid it because, not just Pearl Harbor, but also because FDR created a jobs program that recognized that a bunch of people who are out of work can sometimes be, massed into a fascist crowd. So the whole point of this is that the media elite that we're talking about, they live in bubbles in which they don't experience this stuff. I was so shocked in 2016 as a person who grew up in an evangelical community where they said, how is it that all these evangelicals are supporting Donald Trump? And for anybody who had ever spent a moment in any of these churches, they knew immediately why it was happening. They knew that this idea of religion that these people had was completely fabricated and false. So what has happened in Middle America away from these bubbles, it explains everything. It tells you how this happened, why it's happening, what's happening, where it's going. And the problem is that we have a media class that is so insulated that they don't have the ability to understand it, recognize it, communicate it, and particularly, and most importantly, really reckon with it. They're completely lost when it comes to this stuff.
It's not fashionable, is it, to talk about the negative. People, it's almost like the negative has become the dramatic. But actually it needs to stay negative. And historically, I'm just thinking about the Enoch Powell. He made a speech which I think was entitled Rivers of Blood.
Rivers of Blood.
And, if you look at that language, it's not dissimilar to the language that Donald Trump is using now. And yet there is something missing. The fact that so many people can support Donald Trump, and yet that language, because I refer to it as abusive. This is the kind of new word that I've realized. He is abusing Merrick Garland. He is abusing Jack Smith. And not to mention the black women that he's abusing. And this language, it's like dynamite. Like that thing is going to just go off. And whilst we all love a firework display, you throw a stick of dynamite into the mix and suddenly you're not going to enjoy the show anymore. And that's my fear, is that what damage is being done to the national conversation when you have somebody who is so held an office that is so responsible to be so irresponsible with their language. It is detrimental to the culture, it is detrimental to society and living in a civilized way.
I'm so glad that you brought it up the way that you have. So I'm currently working on my next book. It's really taking a look at the psychological underpinnings of this crisis. And one of the things that I've recognized is that abusive nature is absolutely essential to Donald Trump's appeal. He is an abusive father figure. And there are millions of Americans, Anthony, who were abused and who had abusive father figures. And guess what? When they hear that voice, they know it. I wrote an article not too long ago after Rush Limbaugh died. Rush Limbaugh was an abusive father figure for America. People tuned into it because it was familiar, because it was like the frequency that they were on. And what happens is that a lot of these people are being turned on by this. Parts of themselves that they might not even recognize are coming through. As a result, they are becoming more dangerous. And when they are being told that this world is coming for them, like you said earlier, it's the communists, it's the fascists, it's the Martians, you name it. Like they're going to come and take away your gas stove and put your family in a camp. What gets activated is an actual center of their mind that makes them believe that they are freedom fighters, that, they're the next generation of founding fathers. And as a result, they should pick up that gun. And that is the exact mindset that led people to put on armbands, to goose step up and down Main Street. It's the exact same brand of psychology and worldview. And what happens in times of crisis, when the world is devoid of leaders, and I'm sorry to step on toes, America is devoid of leaders right now. We can talk about Joe Biden's economic record all you want. That doesn't matter to a lot of people, particularly as America is in a state of decline and precarity. People want somebody to give them a vision of the future. And if nobody's giving them a vision of the future, putting on an armband and goose-stepping down Main Street sounds pretty good to a very particular group of people.
Biden is missing in action at the moment. It seems that we have this other problem of his age means that, if he's not prepped and if he's not scripted, it could be embarrassing. I actually want to talk about why people are so frightened of Kamala Harris, because that is a conversation that no one is having. But let me just go back to something that you said earlier about this, the victimization. The people that are following Trump that have that kind of daddy issues or whatever those neurons are that are being activated, to me it's the equivalent of people who are victims of domestic violence. He only hits me because he loves me. To saying to people, to victims of domestic violence, why won't you leave him? Well, because, he loves me, showing me, and I love him. And it's this contemptuous relationship where the narcissist has all the power, and yet there's something sexy about it. And that, for me, is the tragedy, is to see innocent people being brainwashed by this guy who doesn't give a shit about them. And he actually hates this type of person. He has nothing in common with these people, but he is rinsing them for their income. He is fundraising off of them, and he is using them as scapegoats for his own success. And that really is the tragedy, isn't it? That, it is the abuse of humanity. We are watching domestic abuse on our TVs every day.
Yeah, one of the things that became clear to me as the Ron DeSantis campaign started to fall apart is that DeSantis abuses media members. He doesn't abuse his supporters. And Donald Trump does. And one of the things that I found in my research of the right-wing mindset is that a lot of these people are raised in authoritarian households and environments, whether it's an abusive familial situation, a church, some in some way. And what happens? And this is a skeleton key, and I want people, if they take anything away from this interview, I hope they take this. What happens in that environment to a child is that in order to protect themselves, because you have to rely on your family and your parents and your community, or else if you might die because you're a child. What happens is the parts of yourself that would offend those authoritarians, that would offend your church, whether it's your sexuality or a worldview or an artistic side or a sensitivity, what you learn to do is you learn to repress it and destroy it and hate it. and then you project it on the rest of the world. What you end up doing is you go after gay and trans people, you go after women, you go after enemies who are hiding in the shadows. And what you're actually doing, and this is why so many Republicans and supporters are actually hypocrites when, the rubber meets the road, is it's self-hatred. And what Donald Trump gives them at the end of the day is exactly what you said. It feels to them as if they are getting their just desserts. They deserve to be left out in the cold after a rally. They deserve to have him mock their hometown and, show them nothing but absolute contempt. What they're looking for is a world that treats them the way that they feel like they should be treated. It is a real problem of self-hatred that they then project onto the rest of the world.
This is a mental health crisis, yes. A national mental health crisis. And we've had Bandy Lee on the show a couple of times. She talks about Trump contagion theory, the idea that, people have a mental addiction to Trump, which I think we're describing here. But what you've said interests me more in as much as the self-hatred fueling that. And you need to really, you need to have been in therapy, and you need to have really kind of gone to dark places to get your head around this stuff, that we as humans are all fallible. In fact, we had a story, I hate to mention it, but I'm going to. One of in the UK, our kind of most respected newscaster on the BBC, who announced the death of the Queen and everything. He's been around for 30 years. Has, got into a scandal involving sending photographs and receiving photographs. And it was so sad. And, I was thinking about this. It's like how everybody seems to have a double life. And, we project an image, but actually our double life, for some people, it's never activated. For other people, they live in that space. It's like drug addiction. It's like why people don't understand that drug addiction is a disease. Don't understand that. They're like, well, they chose to take the drugs. It's like, no, it's a disease. Humanity is flawed. What sits between our ears is jelly. And I'm just so tired of conservatives or MAGA Republicans, whatever you choose to call them, giving the impression that they are a kind of perfect white race without any fallibility. But in reality, they are as flawed as the rest of us.
I wrote a book called The Man They Wanted Me to Be, which was a dissection of American masculinity. And one of the things, Anthony, that I realized in the research and in some insight with it was that masculinity is particularly based on this projection of strength, right? And we see it in America, big trucks, wearing shirts that I love that Trump has obviously inspired all this, like shirts that have like pictures of automatic weapons that say, come and take them, or, I'm ready to go. I'm ready to fight the ATF if need be. And what it is actually that show of supposed strength. It's hiding weakness. Men are really inherently weak. They're terrified. And this is why you see the MAGA movements like, facts don't care about your feelings, showing them with guns and doing all these big, supposedly macho things. If you listen to Donald Trump, who they'll put on posters, they'll like superimpose his head on Rambo's body or, like fantasize that he's some type of warrior king or something. He's a soft real estate magnate from New York City who is given everything that he's ever wanted. And on top of that, he's like obsessed with like musicals, and tabloid gossip. Yeah. Like he's soft through and through. The entire purpose of this, the entire purpose of the MAGA movement and the authoritarian movement is to go ahead and take advantage of the weakness, particularly of men, white men, and to go ahead and have them act out in a way which is toxic, aggressive, and destructive to pretend that they're not weak, that they're actually strong. But this is why so much of what they do is, quite frankly, very pathetic.
It's ironic, isn't it, that the word strongman, as Ruth Ben-Ghiat writes in her book, hers goes from Mussolini to the present, and the present there is a whole chapter on Trump. America likes a strong man. That's how she starts the book. America likes a strong man. And it's kind of ironic that he presents himself as this kind of mobster. And actually, he is terrified right now. That's the reason why he's spewing all this QAnon garbage on Truth Social and putting out these videos of him trying to kind of cover all bases and project all this abuse and hatred because he's running scared. And whilst, I wish I was more educated in mental health so that I could analyze that moment where he holds up his own mugshot and says, look at this, buy this T-shirt. Because if there's anything going on between those ears, I think there must be something. You almost hear it ticking over. But that is so complex to intellectualize. The idea of a man who's had this whole life in New York and being a real estate guy and not really being in politics, and then playing the role of the everyman when, of course, the guy's a billionaire, couldn't be furthest from an everyman. Anti-establishment, but of course he's completely intertwined with the establishment. Jeffrey Epstein and these were his friends. And then it coming to this point where he's holding up a T-shirt saying, buy my mugshot. I mean, that is a minefield of kind of psychological warfare.
Yeah, what I have found is that human beings, there's a massive difference between who you are and who you pretend to be. And if you continue this performance, particularly if it's a self-destructive performance, which is what Donald Trump is, people don't like to talk about the fact that he's been in the public eye for going on 50 years now. He's ubiquitous in American popular culture because he put himself there.
It's the air that he breathes in his lungs, right? It gives him oxygen.
People forget, he didn't particularly want to be president of the United States of America. He did this in order to give his brand more, more air. He then became president of the United States, became the most talked about focused person in the world. That wasn't enough for him. Thankfully, right now, someone like Elon Musk is giving us just a master's class in this psychology. This is a person who has more money than nearly anybody else in the world and is miserable. And what we're seeing here is it is a failure of the Western mind to get what you want and then still hate yourself and still absolutely loathe who you are, which, by the way, is why Donald Trump hates his supporters, because he looks at them and he's like, how could you fall for what I do? How could you possibly come out here and believe this load that I'm giving you? And what's happening with Donald Trump is that he has gone so far deep into that performance that he can't tell the difference anymore.
Yeah.
It's not just chronic lying. It's an inability to tell reality from unreality.
He's become a pastiche of himself now. He's actually impersonating himself at rallies that he used to do. But if you look close enough, you can actually see that the lights are on, but no one's home. He is playing the role of a contemptuous ex-president.
That's exactly right. And I don't even think he particularly wanted to run for the presidency again. And if anybody remembers this, his first rallies, and I use heavy quotes around that, his first rallies when he announced his new election, he wasn't particularly into it. He looked awful. He didn't really have any of the old energy. It wasn't until the legal jeopardy got brought into it that he's like, oh, I might need to become president in order to help myself here.
Yeah.
And, this is a person who has just compelled himself to live in his own fictions to the point where he cannot tell the difference between it. He is, without a doubt, one of the most fascinating and terrifying individuals. I think that we hate him so much, obviously because he's disgusting, but I think he represents the parts of ourselves that we hate the most. That self-dealing, the vanity, the cruelty, the abusiveness. We look at this and it's almost like, the painting of Oscar Wilde, or Dorian Gray, I guess. You look at it and you're like, oh my God, what's being reflected back to me is the poison of Western culture. This is what the last 50 years of American capitalist culture has created. And it's so grotesque and awful. And meanwhile, you just watch it and you know that this is wrong. You know that this is sick, it's poisonous, and it's so repulsive and upsetting is what it is.
It's like a giant national mirror.
Yes.
Right? Holding up a mirror to a modern capitalist society that just encompasses greed and contempt, and it's a mess. I mean, it's just a mess. Listen, we have to take another pause, but I want to talk about why somebody who is the antithesis of this, Kamala Harris, why people are so scared of her presidency. It seems like whenever her name is mentioned, people change the subject. Okay, we'll be back in just a moment with Jared Yates Sexton. Everyone knows how annoying cheap razors are. The cuts, the irritation, the frustration. And don't get me started with subscription razor services. The headaches those can cause. That's why you've got to meet Henson Shaving. Henson Shaving is a family-owned aerospace parts manufacturer that has made parts for the International Space Station and Mars rover. And now they're bringing precision engineering to your shaving experience. Razor blades are like diving boards. The longer the board, the more the wobble. The more wobble, the more nicks, cuts, and scrapes. A bad shave isn't a blade problem, it's an extension problem. By using aerospace-grade CNC machines, Henson makes metal razors that extend just 0.0013 inches, which is less than the thickness of a human hair. That means a secure and stable blade with a vibration-free shave. And it gets better. The razor has built-in channels to evacuate hair and cream, which makes clogging virtually impossible. Seriously, Henson Shaving wants to be the best razor, not the best razor business. That means no plastic, no subscriptions, no proprietary blades, and no planned obsolescence. The Henson razor works with standard dual-edged blades to give you that old-school shave with the benefits of new-school tech. Once you own a Henson razor, it's only about $3 to $5 per year to replace the blades. My first shave with the Henson razor was incredibly refreshing. The design is sleek, the durability is top-notch. The Henson razor is truly so much better than your run-of-the-mill, quote-unquote, traditional razor brand. And the affordability factor is absolutely game-changing. No more wasting your money on expensive blades. With Henson Shaving, you can get a year of blades for $5. It's time to say no to subscriptions and yes to a razor that'll last you a lifetime. Visit hensonshaving.com/weekend to pick the razor for you and use code WEEKEND and you'll get 2 years worth of blades free with your razor. Just make sure you add them to your cart. That's 100 free blades when you head to hensonshaving.com/weekend and use code WEEKEND. It's the Weekend Show, and we are looking at, isn't it interesting that everybody talks about Trump, yet you can have a million different conversations about him and the criminality and the history and the presidency and the coup, and there's so much to talk about, let alone the kind of mental health aspect, which is a subject that you and I like to talk about, but the media does not. The media will not go there when it comes to talking about the kind of psychology of Trump. And I must recommend a documentary that a friend of mine made called Unfit, The Psychology of Donald Trump, which is still very much available on the streaming networks. And it interviews many psychologists and psychotherapists and analysts about his mental pathology. Let's talk for a second about Kamala Harris, because, I remember when she was first kind of mooted as a potential VP pick for Joe Biden. She was my first choice. And then I kind of switched around a little bit, but I was basically choosing between black women because, it's the opposite of white men. And that is now my new choice, is that everything should just be run and operated and controlled by black women. And I'm very pleased. And I say this with I'm very proud to say that I'm very pleased that so many of the DAs and those who are indicting Donald Trump are strong, intelligent, educated black women. It's important. So why is there this now distaste for Kamala Harris? And why is it that, I've heard from conservatives say, well, I would vote for Joe Biden, but I think he's going to die and I don't want to get Kamala Harris. Are they just racist? Are they misogynistic? I mean, what is the thinking? Is it that she's female? Is it that she's black? Is it both or something else? What am I missing?
Well, I want to go ahead and use a term that probably a lot of people watching this are already aware of, which is intersectionality, which is the idea that power goes along a lot of different courses, right? And the way that we experience the world is affected by all of them. One of the reasons why black women are in this era so important to discourse and how things are moving forward is because not only are they uniquely aware of what racism actually powers America, but also what patriarchal energies are interwoven in it. And by the way, white supremacy is absolutely intertwined with patriarchy. This is one of the things that I traced in the Midnight Kingdom. Like they're all like divisions of power that are being used by white wealthy men in order to make sure, despite the fact that white wealthy men are one of the smallest minorities in the world, that they continue to run things. So as a result, Black women are uniquely capable of understanding actual realities devoid of political mythologies. When it comes to Kamala Harris, one of the things that's happened, I'll just go ahead and lay this out on the table for people who don't know it. Being vice president of the United States of America is a terrible job. Just an awful, awful job. And one of your jobs in all of it is, if there are problems that the president is having in terms of communication, strategy, the actual administrative tasks, the agenda, you're going to get a lot of the flack for it. And one of the things that happened in the early Biden administration is that Kamala Harris's team did not get along well with the Joe Biden team. And as a result, whenever you would see blind items in the paper and people would have conversations about how Joe Biden was doing or how his agenda was doing, they would be accompanied with 3 to 4 articles, which would be, is Kamala Harris really a good vice president? Is she really capable of doing this? Meanwhile, she was being dispatched to every controversial and unwinning situation possible, including the American southern border, which I don't care if you're a Democrat or Republican. Republicans are fascistic with the southern border. The Democratic Party, not great with the southern border either. There are no answers. Yeah. The
messaging is a mess, isn't it?
Yeah, it's not just, it's messaging. It's the actual way that it works. Nobody can tell you what should happen with the border because Americans, and particularly capitalists, really enjoy having immigrants come over so they can be exploited. And that is just a reality that nobody actually wants to sit with. You can make political theater about it. You can pretend to make a wall, do whatever you want, but that is the reality of the situation. So Kamala Harris, for the past 3 years, has been the scapegoat of the Biden administration. It is an inter-office feud. And I will point out that there are a lot of people who are attempting to put themselves in a position to take over should Biden not make it to 24, or if in the future, obviously, you would need a new leader of the party. Gavin Newsom is incredibly aggressive, probably more aggressive than any incumbent era politician that I've ever seen.
And I feel he's maybe disliked a little bit by the party, like the Democrat kind of core, because he's almost too good. He's almost too handsome with beautiful hair, and he really speaks the language. And it's almost showing up Joe Biden, and it's showing up Hakeem Jeffries, and it's showing up other potential candidates because he is so smooth and so good at it. Maybe just too good.
I have my problems with Gavin Newsom and his politics. I think he's one of the most quintessential neoliberal politicians that we have seen in a very, very long time. If you want to learn what actual liberalism and neoliberalism are and what the splits are, go to California and understand the way tech has been treated, billionaires have been treated, and how houselessness has been treated.
But the hypocrisy is right.
The hypocrisy is incredible. Yeah. But Gavin Newsom has wanted it too much. Right. I mean, it's been so, absurdly obvious. But one of the things you'll notice is that the conversations are always, what is Gavin Newsom doing? Gretchen Whitmer, of course, is one of the future stars of this party. What is J.B. Pritzker going to do? The conversation never centers on Kamala Harris. And a large part of it is because she has become the scapegoat within this administration. And that happens a lot of the times with the vice president. I think Joe Biden, you want to talk about psychology? Joe Biden ate a lot for the Obama administration when he was vice president. When things went wrong, Biden was the person who a lot of the times took the friendly fire on that stuff. And I think that sort of carried over into how that administration has been carried out.
It's so interesting because, Mike Pence was a very silent partner to Donald Trump, but he became famous because he did his job on January 6th, right? They're trying to celebrate him as a martyr for maintaining U.S. democracy, but all he did was his job. And so he's a different character, really, isn't it? Because he's running for president and he's got a whole, way about him, again, very performative. You'll never know who that guy really is. But with Kamala Harris, she's a really strong candidate. She has so much experience. She's a great diplomat. she has a slightly annoying laugh and, a few little things that the media pick up on or memes pick up on. They kind of clip all of her giggling together and make it seem like she's just a giggler. And she really isn't. She's compassionate. She's empathetic. And she has an intellect. She has, a good grasp of what the US could be and should be. But I feel sorry for her that she has been scapegoated in this way. Finally, I want to talk about this plan that Donald Trump or the people that surround Donald Trump have in place that very few people know about and rarely talk about. It's called Project 2025, a 1,000-page handbook. They have an army of Americans. The idea is to have the civic infrastructure in place on day one to commandeer and reshape and do away with what Republicans deride as the deep state bureaucracy, in part by firing as many as 50,000 federal workers. Now, we've seen Trump kind of talk about this in his little videos that he makes, but this isn't Trump's idea. Any or even as much as Marjorie Taylor Greene's plan to have these kind of different states just holding certain political persuasions. She was put up to that. And Trump is being put up to this. And I feel like it's something that we really should talk about, because I personally believe that Donald Trump will slip through the fingers of justice when it comes to even with these multiple indictments. I just think that the appetite for putting him away is not there. And I feel like even if he is convicted of something, he'll end up just being on house arrest in Mar-a-Lago, and he'll still be the presidential candidate, and he still stands a very good chance of winning. So let's just have a think about what a second Trump presidency would look like. And this plan, this long-established Heritage Foundation think tank plan to effectively create this new government in waiting for Donald Trump that does away with all of the structure and the norms and just rebuilds the federal government in Donald Trump's image.
I'm so glad that you framed the last part of that through that, because, the idea of Donald Trump sitting in on meetings to create any strategy is laughable.
Yeah.
Like this is literally, and for the record, Ronald Reagan, George H.W. Bush, and George W. Bush. I'm talking about every Republican president since this entire apparatus, that billionaire-driven, donor-driven think tank institute thing. Every time that they've got elected, they've gotten their agenda from these institutes and these think tanks. It's basically a car owner manual that they're given right before they take the oath of office, and then they just do it. It's not like they're coming up with these ideas. They're not sitting up late at night thinking about them. It's a plan that's being carried out by billionaire donors on behalf of their agenda. I also want to say something before we move forward with this, and this will be controversial, Anthony. There is a deep state. Yes, it is a conspiracy theory-driven idea that there's like a shadow government that runs everything. No, there is an administrative state that doesn't change based on who's elected and who you vote for. Yeah. There are a lot of people who carry out operations that you never know about, and that is everything from office workers to managers to the CIA and the FBI and the NSA. There is a lot of stuff that actually does need to be addressed and reformed. That is true. That's not what this is. This is about culling out the administrative state and replacing them with cronies who are, one, more than happy to break the law. One of the problems with Donald Trump going into 2020 and 2021 is he didn't have enough people who were willing to break the law and destroy the Constitution for him. So what Trump and Bannon and other people around him are worried about are finding authoritarian stooges. That's what they're looking into. What the donors who created this plan and the strategy are looking to do is they're looking to have a permanent takeover of the government. They want to create, they rightly diagnose that there is a deep state. They don't want to get rid of the deep state. They want their own deep state. They want a group of people in power who are more than happy to carry out their agenda on their behalf, and they'll be beyond any elections or any sort of staffing or anything moving forward. It is a total takeover of the government by a right-wing group that has the authoritarian agenda that you and I have been talking about.
And he says it out loud, Yes. He talks about it. He talks about this plan so very clearly. And again, the media are not covering it. It is a total denial of the fact that you've got this guy who could win the election because the Electoral College is rigged in favor of him and Republicans, not to mention all the other work that's been going on behind the scenes with the gerrymandering, redrawing of districts and removal of polling places and all these things, little things, little baby steps to achieve the ultimate goal of reinstalling Donald Trump. He has said that he wants people who are politically aligned with him working in the government. It's a little bit like that period of 2 weeks after he lost the election in 2020 or 2019 through to 2021, where he fired a whole bunch of senior people and replaced them with people like Jeffrey Clark, who was willing to act out the kind of Trump plan to overturn the election. Why would you need to fire people in the final 2 weeks of your presidency? Again, let's focus on that this was him doing that. And to all intents and purposes, a second Trump presidency will be retribution. That's a word that he keeps using. He's going to go after anybody and everybody that has wronged him, criticized him, disagreed with him, and pardon anybody that was supportive of him, including Proud Boys and Oath Keepers, of which in the last few days have been receiving record sentences. I mean, this is a terrifying reality. It's not something that we should be joking about. This will completely reshape the United States as we know it, and the world is looking on. No one's going to want to do business with a second Donald Trump presidency. Well, apart from China, maybe, and Russia and North Korea.
And I'll tell you the worst part about this is it's not just the world is looking on, but America, because it is the central node of globalism. Like if you, and going back to the UK, going to Italy, going to France, going to all of these countries where supposedly, the Western democracies, the ones that were above all these things, there's a reason why all of them have right-wing authoritarian movements, why they all have politicians of right-wing neo-fascistic ideologies that are gaining in power or have already taken over power. First of all, it's because this system is falling apart. It's groaning, it needs something to replace it, and they're the ones who are diagnosing it and offering a solution. There's also an international movement in this direction. Vladimir Putin has been behind a lot of this. Viktor Orban has been around a lot of this. For Donald Trump to come in and do what we're talking about, it's following in the Putinist tradition. It's following in the Orbanistic tradition. And if America has this happen, if you think that France, Germany, UK, you name it, this is the playbook. This is not just in America. It is a world vision of a new order. And for something like this to happen, I mean, it would be tremendously detrimental to the world.
Typically, a president would rely on Congress to put policies into place. This heritage project, that it's called, it leans into what legal scholars refer to as a unitary view of executive power that suggests the president has broad authority to act alone. Let's translate what a unitary view is. It's fascism.
Yes.
And they're not hiding it. And America will vote for it in droves only because they think that the alternative, an old man and a black woman, are, they're prepared to give up their whole freedom and their democracy because the alternative to them is unsavory and unpalatable.
I want to point out the Unitarian presidential theory. It really took hold back in the early 2000s with George W. Bush. We had a global war on terror, and God knows what would have happened after George W. Bush, who stole the 2000 presidential election, for anyone who thinks that Donald Trump is an aberration, by the way.
Yeah.
God knows what would have happened in the United States had the Bush administration not been so obviously ineffectual and also had the economy not crashed in 2008. We have no idea where America would be if people hadn't moved away from that thing. But that theory is absolutely fascistic. It's absolutely authoritarian. And these things that are being pushed, it is about dismantling democracy. It's about turning representative democracy into representative government into nothing except for a show, an illusion to try and make people feel like they have a say in things, and to go ahead and use these laws, again, in the Orbanist tradition, Viktor Orban in Hungary, to go ahead and create a culture that is controlled by a vast minority of the people. What you are describing is absolutely the plan, and they're very far ahead of this. And the inability for people to recognize it, to fight against it, to name it, to understand it, it's a large reason why these people have a head start. Our media, our politicians, the people who should be talking about this are so far behind. It's really, really unnerving.
I have a final question, and then we must finish, and that is, what can we do about it? Like, what in the meantime? People are going to watch this and they're going to be fearful of this, and we're not here to scare people, but we do need a reality check in America. So what can people do? Like, is the vote enough? How activated and how involved should people get to kind of expose this, or even just vote against it?
Well, first of all, voting is just base level democracy. We're basically told in the United States of America every 2 to 4 years, you go to a ballot box, you choose somebody, and you walk on, and that's it. Participatory democracy is much more than that. We've been sold a false bill of goods that that's all you need to do. The authoritarianism and the neo-fascism that you and I are talking about here, it feeds on loneliness, broken communities, and feelings of powerlessness. Neoliberalism as an ideology, which is what we've been living under for the past few decades. The wreckage that we're dealing with right now is neoliberal wreckage. You're supposed to feel alone. Like Donald Trump, you're supposed to feel like all you're trying to do is screw people over. You are smart. Other people are stupid. They're there for you to take advantage of them, and that's it. We have to reform communities. We have to find other people. That way we can work with them and fight with them. I think the labor developments we've seen over the past couple of years are really, really hopeful. Yeah. But we have to rebuild these communities that have been intentionally destroyed. We have to find each other, have faith in one another, and develop a fight for a vision of the future that isn't just protecting our institutions. That's base level stuff. Like reinstating Roe v. Wade and codifying a woman's right to choose, that's a starter. You know, like that, like
it should be a given.
That should be a given.
Yeah.
We shouldn't have to sit here and fight for gay and trans people to live or black people to vote.
Yeah.
That shouldn't even be an argument. We have to train our eyes to a horizon that's so far beyond that. We deserve better than this, and only by working together and getting involved and actually participating in democracy are we going to get there.
Okay. Jared, thank you, as ever. We will have another conversation in the future, I have no doubt. Good luck with your book, The Midnight Kingdom, which is on the shelf behind you. And hopefully people will reach out to Jeff Bezos and get themselves a copy of that, or hopefully directly with the publisher. Thanks again for joining the Weekend Show.
Thank you so much, Anthony.
I'm Anthony Davis. Don't forget to support me and independent journalism on Patreon, patreon.com/5Minute News. Download my daily 5-Minute News podcast. It drops every morning. And join me next week with a brand new special guest and 3 more factual news stories to discuss on the 5-Minute News Weekend Show with Midas Touch.